how do you achieve immersion in your maps? So let's say, for instance, you have an idea. It's going to be, I don't know, a jungle map, or it's going to be an interior office building. What are the tips and tricks that you do to get the player to be immersed in your environment?
Immersion is a tricky, and it became a little bit of a buzzword in the industry. What I started to do, and I actually didn't even realize that I was doing it back in the time, I often got inspired by, let's say, as embarrassing as it sounds, there was a Navy SEAL map called Industrial. And I was inspired by one scene in a really cheesy Bon Jovi movie video. And I don't listen to Bon Jovi, it was just an MTV in the background. The interesting thing was, for me, it was this jump of a couple of kids or young guys jumping over in an industrial building. And that was an emotion which had me in my guts. And I was like, I wanted to create a map which had this emotion. But the important point was, I kept this emotion when I built the map. And every time I built a section of the level, I was questioning myself, is that still the emotion which was my early inspiration? And I took this emotion and tried to bring it across, not just on the pure level design per se, the basic gameplay, but also then thinking about, okay, well, how can I bring it across in art? So if it was a jump, that means, do I have enough verticality? Do I have enough gaps for people to jump? Do I have enough moments where people have to rush and then sprint to get this kind of energy, the feeling of energy in the level? What we're nowadays doing in the industry is we get together and we get the narrative director, if it's single player, the art director, the level design director, and the creative director in one room, sometimes sound, sometimes cinematic, and we all try to agree on an emotion. And it sounds very, very cheesy, but we agree on this one level, on this name, let's say frenzy. And there's an emotion everybody can agree on. And once all the departments agree on this one word and we leave, we come back to this word. We all speak the same language. And if I was a level designer, I wanted to make sure that my work is consistent. My work is to get this immersion out there. Because otherwise, if you know these levels where you walk around the corner and you see like this part of the level is really cool, you go to the next part, which doesn't really make much sense anymore. And it all falls apart, the immersion of a one coherent world. But if you just write it down, your one feeling, your one vision you have for this level. That's the reason why I like emotion, because it's something so universal. And you stick to it, and you question when you start to going a little bit more into 3D, if it's still the same for each part, I think then you can create a coherent, immersive feeling.
Earlier on, you were starting to mention things about ratios, and it's actually one of the questions that I had. When I watched your video about DE Dust 2, you did mention the golden ratio. You didn't really talk about it too much, but you showed the classic golden ratio diagram and superimposed over Mona Lisa, and then I think you were hinting that perhaps the top view of DE Dust 2 also follows that golden ratio. Are you consciously using this golden ratio or the rule of thirds or other types of design techniques? Are you consciously using them when you design your map on the grid?
I'm not sure if I ever took it as a design rule per se, but whenever you start drawing and you try to go simplify and you're going into a grid, you realize there's a pattern. So I very early realized that, let's say, it's okay. It's not necessarily a secret that if you're on the defending side in Counter-Strike, the objective point, let's say the bomb spots, shouldn't be exactly in the middle. Defenders need the time to prep their defense, to defend their strategy. So you're automatically already talking about something, let's say 1 to 3 or 3 to 4. You're already giving the defenders an advantage. And it can be rule of third, can be golden rules, but it has to be on their side. And if you look at Counter-Strike capture the flag maps, it's very, very similar. There are certain rules which you start to see certain patterns in good maps. And you start to see that other maps who fail to make these basic calculations or these basic patterns, where this very, very quickly falls apart. On single-player map, I often give the players at least a quarter of the space for people to commit to a space, because otherwise, if you start fighting early on let's say in a sandbox bubble, all the AI runs towards you, everybody's dead, and then you walk through the rest of the space completely empty-handed. This is a waste. So the more time you will spend, you will feel that certain games favor certain ratios. And it might be that, let's say, Quake maps, because they are potentially faster, have a different ratio than Counter-Strike maps who are a little bit more slower and more tactical. And of course, it depends also on the objectives. That's why I like analyzing existing maps to find out these ratios. I will not become a priest and say it's always the golden rule, which always works for you for all games. It's really game dependent. And that's the reason why I like analyzing existing maps. For single player, it's certainly different than to multiplayer. And again, even within single player, it's different because some AI systems work better than others, or more dynamic or more flexible. So, but I'm still fascinated about ratio. And the reasons why I started all these analyzing stuff is because back in the art part of my high school, we talked a lot about composition. And we always argued with our teacher that level design is art too. And I often lost that argument. But I still believe that composition from art is important learning going to level design. And level designers can learn a lot from these compositions. And that's where a lot of this thinking for myself started. Because there must be something. If something guides your eyes, and this is called composition in art, some kind of composition must help the player to guide through a level. And the better that is, well, the better your level is going to be. It's the same with art.
What books, if any, do you recommend pertaining to level design, design in general, architecture in general, any planning, anything like that?
To be honest, I never read any of the design books. What I read a lot was architecture books. I went often into the bookstore, and the architecture books, for whatever reasons, there was always a pile which was on sales. I don't know if nobody buys them, but I just loved buying those books and then starting to see, is there anything which inspires me for an interesting layout? There were obviously buildings or even gardens. Gardens actually a very, very interesting topic. They purposely built gardens in England, or English gardens, to look natural, but there's a clear composition behind them, but it's hidden. And I think that's something which always fascinated me in level design, because we try to build these compositions, but then we try to hide it. We don't want to be the standard map and everybody recognize the standard layout. We try to hide it. We try to give it our own little unique spin. And I think that's what I learned from architecture. Like, even if you look at the same buildings from the same era, all the buildings have a certain standard, but everybody, especially the great architects, they try to put their own spin on it. And that created for me the biggest inspiration to do similar things for level design. Because again, I try to see patterns in one and try to bring it across to other styles of media or culture. I think there's so many patterns which we have out there to see our inspiration, just alone how the pacing from theaters still nowadays inspires the pacing for most single-player maps out there. So I think there's so many cross-connections. By ignoring all these other cultural phenomena, we would be stupid not to do so.
You mentioned before how nowadays level design involves a very large team because of the fact that you can put a lot more assets and textures and sound and graphics into a level. In your opinion, what is the objective of the level designer?
Oh God, the cliche comment we normally get is that the job of level designer is to make the level fun, because then you have the artist who makes it look good, and then you have maybe a technical level designer who makes sure that it technically runs smooth, and then you have the technical artist who makes sure that the art runs smooth, and then you have potential game designers who take care of certain features in the maps, like AI or boss fights and so on. For me, nowadays, the level designer becomes this person who brings all these ingredients together. If you look at the level, this is where all these pieces come together. The AI, the game code, the sounds, the music, the art, the textures, the lighting, the special effects, all the gameplay features, they all come together in the level. And the level designer is sort of the host of all these pieces. So for lack of better terms, nowadays level designer is almost more of a diplomat than what we used to be like 10, 20 years ago, where we actually were our own artists, our own texture artists, our own modelers, our own sound designers, our own lighters, our own scripters. That all started to break apart and we became specialists. Like one of the reasons why I got hired at Crytek was because I knew art very well. And that's why I have an art credit for FarCry, because I knew how to do lighting and basic composition work. Nowadays, that's all taken care of by art. So we're becoming more and more specialists, and level design is actually coming down to the fundamentals, the pacing in single player, the main lane design in classic multiplayer maps. So it really becomes to this person who melds all these departments together, but it's still a very distilled version of it.
Nowadays, gaming is so popular. If you think about, you mentioned Dota and League of Legends, but there's also the Counter-Strike, Call of Duty type games, and the Unreal Tournament has a new engine out, and so on and so forth. You've got the Splinter Cell franchise and stuff. What advice would you give to new mappers today in 2017 who maybe ultimately would like to join the gaming industry? What advice would you give to them?
There are many, many ways nowadays. I mean, okay, back in my old times, there wasn't a really official way to get in the industry. You either got detected by somebody, or you got very, very lucky, or came from the movie industry. Nowadays, there are many more options out there. Universities is one way. There are many gaming universities out there, but this is not a guarantee. Just because you study in university game or level design, it doesn't mean you automatically get a job. It's still a bit more tricky. I come from the mod community, and if you ask me, this is still probably one of the most favored ways out there. Just think about it. If you're somebody, and this is a very personal opinion, this is not an official opinion, this is a very, very, I grew up in the mod community. I know what it means to create maps, to work through the night and release a map without any help, or just the help maybe from my team or people from the forum, but just alone getting the courage and the motivation to release these maps instead of having a teacher behind you who pushes you forward. So I think that still has a big credit for me in my heart. This is a very personal opinion, therefore. Whenever I see a CV from a level designer who has mod or any kind of community background, I always get a little plus in my heart. It's hard to quantify it, but there's a little, yeah. I like these. That's where I come from. So for me, mod community work is still probably one of the ideal ways. Otherwise, universities, ideally, I recommend to universities who have a connection to big companies. Ubisoft runs a few programs in certain cities. I can just throw it out there. But the third option, and this is a little bit of a tricky one because there's no guarantee, is starting at let's say, for example, a QC or QA job, just to get your foot in the door. We have a lot of level designers in our companies, or even back at Crytek, who started in QC or QA, who then got exposed to gaming or the industry, how the processes work. They get exposed to the people, and then, of course, exposed to the tools and learn these tools. And if they have questions, they have all the experts right in the same company. And if they're very motivated and they work hard, they're often given an opportunity to become one of the junior level designers. So I think this is still one of the three main ways to get in industry, even though mod communities get a little extra plus from my side.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about your YouTube channel. What are you planning next for, future episodes for Bauer Design Solutions?
I'm currently working on part 3, which then starts to go a little bit away from the fundamentals and starts to now think about, okay, what happens next? What are the number of the options you have to add? When to add more options? To basically making your skeleton plan from very simplistic to get a bit more complex. So this will be probably covered part 3 of that whole series. The next steps, I haven't really figured it out yet. I think I wrote a rough script for part 4 already, but I'm not really sure yet. I still have to craft it and write it. I want to write a little bit more about single player as well, or potentially creative direction or creative leadership, because I think this is a topic which isn't really covered too much yet. Too many management Bibles out there are focused about managers and not necessarily about us creative leaders who have to motivate people from a different level or a different perspective. So those are the kind of things I'm currently thinking about, but yeah, and world building, because I'm writing a lot of roleplay stuff too. So that's something I want to expose as well. How to start creating a universe, how to start creating a world from a fictional perspective, and not just pure level design. But level design will always stay in my heart, and then I will finish the multiplayer level design series because there's so many more things to talk about.